All right, hey, what's going on, you guys? This is book review number 24. This is my second book review of the day. This is also my second book review about Australia because I am going to be reviewing Sydney by Jan Morris. Now, I will say, I enjoyed this book. It was a good book, but it was not what I was expecting. Because I was going in expecting something like, if you saw one of my previous reviews, something like Bangkok Days that very much focused on the present of Australia. And not just the present of Australia, but particular stories within the present of Australia. And while this Jan Morris provides sort of context for her overall narrative by like little clippets or little snips from daily life, really, and in a very, I mean, I hate to be stereotypical here, but she is English, in a very English fashion. She doesn't really tell this. Well, she tells the story of the modern city, but she doesn't tell stories of a particular narrative about people within the modern city. What she does is she tells the narrative of the history of the city and then projects that upon the values that the city now possesses. Now, I know that's a little vague or whatever, but I really feel like in a way it was good, but in a way it kind of detracted. David Foster Wallace, who, say what you will, famously said, old writers say that young writers can't see the forest through the trees. But the truth about old writers is that they can see the forest, but they can see the forest clearly, but they can't see the trees within the forest. I feel that's what Jan Morris really does. Now, that being said, I said that she takes the past and then projects it upon the current. Now, here's the thing about history, is that that is very true. You talk about something like the colonial past of Australia and the distrust of authority that breeds. Well, she tells stories like how people in Sydney are particularly cynical about their politicians. Now, everyone across the world tends to be cynical about their politicians, but cynical in a way that they can't even act like functionally. Like, I feel a lot of people say politicians are cynical about politicians, but they feel that at least there's some they're not all corrupt, right? Like, it might be a corrupt system, but there can be good people within it. Well, most Australians just view all politicians as corrupt, and she mentions that as a story in here. She mentions the sort of fighting narrative of Australia, give it a go or whatever, holds true in the political spectrum. There was, she goes into the House of Lords with, on Macquarie Avenue, this beautiful historical avenue by I believe the second governor of Australia, who basically saved the country. You think it would be a Gentile or Gentile, or whatever, but they're arguing, they're yelling at each other, they're accusing each other of things. And it talks about the newspapers who would rip one another and just be very salacious, sort of, I guess, in the English tabloid tradition, but the tabloids tend to be the newspapers. It talks about she talks about the glamour of Sydney, and how the modern beach culture, which is what Sydney is definitely famous for, evolved. It used to be that people couldn't go on the beach. You could go on the beach, but it was only between 5 and 6 in the morning and 9 and 10 at night, or something like that, or 8 and 9 at night, whenever dusk is. But then there was a newspaper reporter that challenged us by going and swimming in the ocean in the middle of the day. And then when he walked out, everyone expected the police to arrest him, but they just let him go. And of course, this opened up the floodgates for what is now modern Sydney, and that sort of seminal moment. She talks about the history of the Opera House, and I don't know if you guys know this or not, but how, although viewed very spectacularly and like a success story today, there were multiple architects, multiple design firms, ran, millions and millions of dollars in debt, or beyond budget. She talks about the coat hanger, the Harbor Bridge, that was basically a construction project in the Depression, to revitalize its people. And then, she does talk about some smaller moments. Those are sort of like the big things. But then she talks about smaller moments like the suburb of Parramatta and how that developed. And it is still sort of like Sydney's second city, the second kind of center of the city. How that developed as a farming establishment after the convicts came. And it has sort of that still more... once again, I want to say genteel, but sort of pastoral feel, kind of a little slower pace. And she talks about different tycoons throughout the era, be they wool tycoons or meatpacking tycoons that, Australia is famous for sending both those commodities back to England, and that's really how they made their living in the 18th century. And how some of those houses along the harbour, which is the central heart of Australia, is the harbour, how some of those exist to this day, and you can still walk around and visit them. I actually wish I kind of knew about those houses when I lived there. I did live in Australia for a while. I could have known a little bit more about the history and visited those places. Maybe someday. Let's see, what else is there? Yeah, I'd say those are just some illustrative examples, and something about this book is that it really kind of does jump around a lot by providing context to a lot of different areas. So it's hard for me to comment on the narrative of the story. I guess it does kind of separate them by chapters. Let's see if I can get to it. Like Genesis, appearances, people, majorities, minorities, indigenes, Aborigines, consolations and purposes. But she really does kind of, while giving a broad picture, doesn't really concentrate on one thing. So it's hard for me to find like a narrative through line for this book. But what I've just mentioned over the last few minutes is kind of illustrative of what you'll get with this book. Kind of the context for why Sydney is what it is. Now, like I said, my criticism is she'll have like some example like, like 100 years ago, there was this really eccentric, say like meat magnate, or some sort of person that started an enterprise. She mentions that Sydney is a very entrepreneurial city, not by sheer greed, but just by necessity, that it was just sort of a boom and bust economy, the way it works. A lot of commodities, a lot of ways to get very rich, but also a lot of failure too. She mentions that particularly with the real estate market, even within the last 20 years, is there was this huge rise and then a huge fall off when real estate prices fell. Okay, but to get back to my point, there would be like a very wealthy magnate, businessman, tycoon that would be eccentric and have all these eccentric behaviors, and have the people of Sydney would be attracted to all these crazy things about this person, but would then compare that with, and here's exactly how that circumstance plays out with a modern person. Now, the similarities may be, the magnate of old, or the tycoon of old that was eccentric and drew the attention of the people of Sydney, may have informed whatever is going on in the current circumstance, but she doesn't allow the current circumstance to breathe. She just sees sort of the current circumstance as merely a development of whatever previous history the city had, which I wish she more concentrate on the current eccentricities for their own sake and not merely as deterministic results of the past. You know? That being said, she is an older author. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that just as perspective. And I'm much younger, so maybe I'm more idealistic about this. Maybe when you get older, you see those through lines through the narrative and can draw them thusly. I guess I'll leave it at that. I would recommend this book. Like I said, it doesn't, unlike say like Bangkok Days, which I really enjoyed, doesn't really kind of cover a local modern perspective, but does provide context for why Sydney people tend to be, if not deterministically tend to be the way that they are, or tend to be the way that they tend to be. So I'll leave you with this. This is a good story. This is a good story. I know, I'm just rambling at this point. But I'll leave you with this. She did tell a story about another eccentric. You know, Sydney tends to be filled with them because of this boom and bust economy. I mean, they're all the pastoralists, but at least the people that draw the public eye tend to be, you know, to a degree, sports figures, which is what we would see in America, but also just tend to be like random people that get in the news, that sell the newspapers. Well, another random eccentric who was born into wealth, but did not make their own fortune, but basically gave up that life of wealth for living in Circular Quay, which is the dock area, the very heart where the first ships in Sydney landed, were right in the Circular Quay. Decided to give up the extravagant life to go rant and rave about politics in the Circular Quay. And two particular interests were the bus people, or the bus drivers of the city, you know, like the public transport, are too high-strung, or too have their necktie tied a little too tight. And the second one was the dislike of the cab drivers and how they don't have enough personality, and at the same time tend to be, you know, also maybe a little too tight-laced. Now, these seem to be eccentric things to argue about, but I guess that was this person's passion. I think this was like in the 60s or 70s, was just arguing about this. And the story that I found really interesting is this person got so mad at a taxi driver once that demanded, after getting a bad ride, that the taxi driver drive them all the way from Sydney to Perth and back, just because. Now, if you know, between Sydney and Perth, that's about the distance between New York and Los Angeles. So just on a whim, told him to drive him back and forth. And guess what? That cab driver did. So I don't know what to say about that, but that's certainly, that just kind of informs the ribald, go get them, just be in there, give it a go nature of the Sydney people. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. Sydney by Jan Morris. If you kind of want to know about the city, know why people are the way they are, like I said, check this out. All right, you guys. See you later.